4 a.m. in the woods. This is a chapter by chapter Bible study series, and we are in 2 Samuel chapter 19. God blessed me so much with this one, and hopefully I don't cry at the end when I tell you about it. Last chapter, in verse 18, we find out about Absalom's defeat. David gave his commanders a very clear order: please go easy on my son, spare him for me, and they did not follow through on those orders. They ended up killing Absalom anyways, with Joab taking the lead on that. David gets the news and it says that he was deeply moved and he was grieving over his son. My son, Absalom. Chapter 19. It was reported to Joab, the king is weeping. He's mourning over Absalom. That day's victory was turned into mourning for all the troops, because on that day the troops heard, the king is grieving over his son, so they returned to the city quietly that day, like troops come in when they are humiliated after fleeing in battle. The king covered his face and cried loudly, my son, Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son. I'm trying to hold it in. David is a leader, he's a victor, but he's also a father who just lost his child, his son. And Joab went into the house to the king and said, today you have shamed all your soldiers, those who saved your life, as well as your sons, your wives, and your concubines, by loving your enemies and hating those who love you. Today you have made it clear that the commanders and all the soldiers mean nothing to you. In fact, today I know that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead, it would be fine with you. Joab then tells David, get up, go encourage your soldiers, or I'm telling you, they're all going to leave and no one's going to be backing you anymore. This makes me not want to ever be king or royalty. You have duties, royal duties, and then you also have your personal life, and what a struggle that it's all meddled in. Seeing some really intense leadership woes for David here. Joab's rebuke worked, and David goes out to the men and starts to talk to them. People throughout all the tribes of Israel were arguing among themselves, saying, the king rescued us from the grasp of our enemies, and he saved us from the grasp of the Philistines, but now he has fled from the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, the man we anointed over us, has died in battle, so why do you say nothing about restoring the king? They were debating on whether or not they wanted to bring David back. David sent word to the priests Zadok and Abiathar, say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to restore the king to his palace? The talk of all Israel has reached the king at his house. You are my brothers, my flesh and blood, so why should you be the last to restore the king? And tell Amasa, aren't you my flesh and blood? May God punish me and do so severely if you don't become commander of my army from now on instead of Joab. So David is promising to replace Joab, which I don't really blame him. He disobeyed a direct order, and he did not seem to have any empathy at all for David grieving over his son. When David gets back, he is greeted by a few people. Shimei, the guy that was throwing stones at him and saying stuff, he actually greeted David, one of the first people. He fell face down before the king and said to him, my lord, don't hold me guilty and don't remember your servant's wrongdoing on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king not take it to heart, for your servant knows that I have sinned. But look, today I'm the first one of the entire house of Joseph to come down and meet my lord the king. Abishai, son of Zeruiah, David's nephew, shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed? And David answered, son of Zeruiah, do we agree on anything? Have you become my adversary today? Should any man be killed in Israel today? Am I not aware that today I am king over Israel? So the king said to Shimei, you will not die. Then the king gave him his oath. David is choosing clemency. He wants to be lenient. He wants to keep the peace. He's back. He is now ruling again, and he wants to make sure that he unites an already fractured kingdom thanks to Absalom's rebellion. Also love that this act of mercy is very godlike. Mercy to someone who doesn't really deserve it. Then we finally get to hear Mephibosheth's side of the story. Remember, Ziba had came to David and said, Mephibosheth stayed in the kingdom, and he said, I want to take it back for my grandfather Saul. Well, we also found out that that was completely fabricated and made up. Here we have Mephibosheth's story. Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet, trimmed his mustache, or washed his clothes from the day that the king left until the day he returned safely. King David meant a lot to him. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, "Mephibosheth, why didn't you come with me?" "My servant Ziba betrayed me. Actually, your servant said, I'll saddle the donkey for myself so that I may ride it and go with the king, for your servant is lame. Ziba slandered your servant to my lord the king, but my lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you think is best." David then says, "Oh, that's fine. Let's have you and Ziba split the land." And then Mephibosheth goes as far to say "I'm just happy you're back. Let him have it all anyways." And there's this really kind farewell from this 80-year-old man named Barzillai. Apparently, he helped David while he was living in Mahanaim, and he even provided for David and all of them and helped them out. And so he greets David and says farewell, and David invites him, like, "Why don't you come stay at the palace?" But Barzillai is like, "No, I'm old. All of that would be wasted on me. I'm just going to stay home near my mother and father's grave where I can die at peace." And he also gives him a servant named Chimham in place of himself. And so David takes Chimham and says, "I'll take care of him as you would." The king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham went with him. All of the troops of Judah and half of Israel's escorted the king. Suddenly all the men of Israel came to the king. They asked him, "Why did our brothers, the men of Judah, take you away secretly and transport the king and his household across the Jordan, along with all David's men?" All the men of Judah responded to the men of Israel, "Because the king is our relative. Why does this make you angry? Have we ever eaten anything of the king's or been honored at all?" The men of Israel answered the men of Judah, "We have 10 shares in the king, so we have a greater claim to David than you. Why then do you despise us? Weren't we the first to speak of restoring our king?" But the words of the men of Judah were harsher than those of the men of Israel. They're kind of fighting over him a little bit. When I see David's grief for his son Absalom, I couldn't help but think about our God. A father's unconditional love for a rebellious son. And David had even wished that he had died in Absalom's place. Just like our Father sent his son to die in our place, to unite a fractured kingdom. God is our Lord and leader, but he's also our Father and loves us. I'll see you on the next 4 a.m. when we cover chapter 20.